Hello, welcome to Bronzeville. I'm Ghian Foreman, a member of the Elevated Chicago Steering Committee and the Green Line South Community Table. We're here at Overton, one of the former CPS schools that were closed, and part of our E-Hub on the Green Line South. For us, ETOD means creating a situation, a community, where dreamers, artists, entrepreneurs get to come together. A place where they can grow food, grow flowers, they can work out together, they can dance, play music together, a place where dreams can come alive.
Hi, I'm Kendra Freeman, the 2020-21 co-chair of Elevated Chicago Steering Committee.
I'm Joanna, Trotter, member of the Elevated Chicago Steering Committee and co-chair of its Capital and Programs Working Group.
Here at the southern end of CTI's Green Line, ETOD is pulsating with community engagement.
It's strengthening a busy intersection by connecting affordable housing and new retail options close to transit. And it's creating a more walkable environment for pedestrians and visitors.
And ETOD is integrating a historic restaurant within the development so it can stay and not get pushed out.
Hi, I'm Christian Diaz of the Logan Square Neighborhood Association and the 2020-2021 co-chair of Elevated Chicago Steering Committee. We are thrilled to share that in Chicago, ETOD is on track. Especially here in Logan Square, which is my home, ETOD is on track. That's because of the voices of parents, students, teachers, activists, pastors, all of us staying together. All people, no matter their race or income, deserve a home and the opportunity to succeed in school and in life. This also means having access to public transit.
Hi, I'm Joe Dunne from Bickerdike Redevelopment Corporation. Here on Emmett Street, ETOD is on track. For the Latino residents of this community who call Logan Square home and who witnessed the loss of nearly 20,000 Latino neighbors who could no longer afford to live here, this housing near transit means they're here to stay.
Hello everybody, hola a todos. Welcome to On Track, Elevated Chicago 4th Annual Symposium on Equitable Transit-Oriented Development, or ETOD.
On behalf of our Steering Committee and Leadership Council, welcome to the 4th Annual Elevated Chicago Symposium.
This program is produced by RUT Resources with support from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation.
Today, you'll hear from some of Chicago's leading advocates for ETOD pair up to talk about the ways one of our city's greatest infrastructure assets, public transit, can be used to advance racial equity, to help the city recover from the public health and racial injustice crises of 2020, and to make our communities more walkable, resilient, and livable.
If you don't know Elevated Chicago, allow me to introduce us. We are a coalition of 14 organizations advancing equitable transit-oriented development in Chicago. We have a staff of 3. We make grants, we make investments, we advance policy, we change narratives, all for ETOD.
Our work is part of a national effort funded by the Strong, Prosperous, and Resilient Communities Challenge, or SPARK, to advance racial equity in 6 cities.
Like Chicago, in Atlanta, Denver, LA, Memphis, and San Francisco, there are collaboratives like ours working for more sustainable, affordable, and healthier communities. To our SPARK family out there, hello, and thanks for joining us today.
Elevated Chicago puts a lot of value, love, and respect on connecting people, places, and processes through transit.
We build community with people who partner with us to move them work forward. Our steering committee and our leadership council, our working group for ETOD, systems change, capital and programs and knowledge sharing, our equitable development ambassadors, and our Jedis, who you'll learn more about later.
We are passionate about places where ETOD is happening, like here along the South Branch of the CTA Green Line, and in other equitable hubs, or E-hubs, where we work.
An E-hub is the 1/2 mile radius around the CTA stations where Elevated Chicago works. At these E-hubs, the community comes together to decide what the area around the station should look like. We call these gatherings our community tables.
We are thoughtful about process, working to change systems and policies to create a more equitable Chicago.
Speaking of process, we are excited to share that this symposium is our first big event since the Chicago Plan Commission unanimously approved Chicago's new ETOD policy, giving a green light to the city putting the weight of its resources behind ETOD projects.
Work that began about 3 years ago by a small group of Elevated Chicago members has swelled into this brand new formal policy and pilot program.
There are so many people to thank, dozens. We will share their names later in the program, but want to give a little love to the names you see on the screen here.
You can learn more about the ETOD policy at chi.gov/ETOD, and you can learn more right now.
And now, Ghian Foreman, a member of Elevated Chicago's Steering Committee and Green Line South Community Table, talks with Mayor Lloyd Lightfoot about ETOD.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
We've known each other for a while and that kind of thing. One of the things that I always kind of say is that I wish that people could hear you where it wasn't a press conference, like some of the conversations that we have. So I'm hopeful that this conversation could be that. One of the first questions when I talk to people, and they always ask me, how's the mayor holding up? This is unprecedented times right now. How are you holding up? How's the family?
You know what? We're doing fine.
Okay.
So I say it with qualification because I know few people who have come through this experience and are here and present that are going to say, I'm doing great.
Yeah.
Some are, but I'll say we're doing fine. It's been a very hard, long period. It's been hard for me as mayor. It's been hard for the city and our residents. But also, I'm also a wife, a mom, a daughter, and so managing all of that. And I've got an elderly mother who's had some challenges through this, but we're doing fine. I feel like because it's summer and because it's light, which just totally changes my mood, I feel like for the first time in 15 plus months, I have the luxury of being able to think beyond the immediate crisis.
Yeah.
And that has definitely opened up, I think, a range of possibilities for me. The thing I like most about this job is being able to think and meet with people and hear about their ideas and creative things, and then think about how we can, as the city government, be a convener and a promoter, if you will, of great ideas that are happening out there and the innovation in our city. So I feel like I've gotten the space to get back to that work, and it's great and it's energizing.
Good. So we're here really to kind of talk about ETOD. As you know, Elevated Chicago has been working. It's a part of Spark National, nationwide initiative, but here in Chicago, our initiative is Elevated Chicago, and we've been working hand in hand with your administration on ETOD. So recently, Chicago Plan Commission approved the ETOD policy that seeks to leverage existing City Hall initiatives to strengthen affordable housing commitments and standardize community engagement across departments and other sectors. This is big news for us, the work that we've been doing.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And I'm proud that this has come to fruition. It's a big deal because what we've seen is groups pushing for one policy initiative or another, but bringing it together in a comprehensive way and making it now official city policy is a big deal, because it means you don't have to beg, borrow, and steal to make sure that ETOD is a part of what we're doing. Every project, every initiative, we're thinking about that and putting those thoughts forward as we think about how we expand opportunities in neighborhoods. So this is a very big and important step for us.
So there's a lot of different initiatives taking place, right? There's Invest Southwest, there's the ETOD. How do you see all of these things connecting together, a fabric that's connected together?
Well, I think they are interconnected for sure. When you think about what do we need to build wealth among people that have been disinvested in or locked out for so long, what do we do to make sure that we're reinvigorating neighborhoods and providing investment and capital, but also doing it in a way that makes those neighborhoods remain affordable. It's all interconnected. You've got to have intentionality about what you're doing. You know, I live in Logan Square, And for years and years and years, I watched my neighborhood transform. Sometimes for the better, but more recently what I've come to know is that there's been a massive wave of displacement of longtime residents, whether they are homeowners or whether they're renters, because we let market forces at work without any kind of intentional regulation to make sure that, to coin a phrase, development didn't lead to displacement. The only way we make sure that longtime residents get to reap the fruits of neighborhoods in transformation is to be intentional and create affordability opportunities, listening to the people that are on the ground. That's why this step forward in really systematizing and embracing ETOD at the Plan Commission level is so significant.
Yeah, so that's a great first step. So now here's the hard question. There are groups that are focused on transit-oriented development, transit, and that kind of thing. Is your administration prepared for the community to hold you guys accountable?
Well, we are absolutely not only prepared to hold, have these groups hold us accountable. We've been working hand in glove with many of these leading organizations, Elevated being one of them, to make sure that we're not just coming up with a policy in City Hall and saying, here it is, the cake is baked. I don't think that's how policy should ever be done.
Yeah.
I think you've got to respect and recognize that many people are out there and have been doing this work for decades, if not longer, and then join the conversation, be a part of an existing table that's been set. What we can do from sitting from the mayor's office and city government is we can elevate the platform, no pun intended. We can use the bully pulpit of the mayor's office to really advocate for these things, and then also provide resources. One of the things I know about development is a lot of community organizations across the city have had these fantastic plans, quality of life plans, development plans, this or that, but what have they lacked? They've lacked a partner in City Hall. They've lacked resources to really bring these great plans into reality. And so what I have tried to be about and will continue to be about is working with those groups, not to reinvent the wheel, not to start with a blank piece of paper where work has already been done, but coming in with, as I said, a humble heart. Because when you come into community, you're going to get humbled. Yes. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You can have the best of intentions, but people are skeptical.
Yeah.
And rightfully so, we get that. But you got to kind of a humble heart, and you got to have a listening ear. And if we approach our business in neighborhood after neighborhood with those two things in mind, and think about what can we do to really help support the work that's already happened, how can we add additional perspective, additional resources, then we're going to get things done.
Yeah. So you have a couple of ETOD projects, pretty exciting. You know, any that come to mind to you across the city right now that you can think of that are some of the ones that you're really excited about?
Well, listen, I'm watching with great interest the one that's right in my backyard in Logan Square, right? There's a fantastic ETOD, 100% affordable project that's been going up right near the Blue Line stop there. And then other work is going to happen in that area to really, I think, untangle some of the traffic issues. But that is a great example. A lot of work, a lot of planning from the ground up. And what the city did is to make space for that work to happen.
Yeah, love it. There's also one on the Green Line, 43rd,
Yes.
43rd Green.
Yes.
And out on 95th Street, they have some big plans that they're
Yes.
working on, kind of thinking about all of that. And so for us, for me at least, for one of the things that Elevated has done, for me, it really has connected me personally with other parts of the city, getting an opportunity to kind of see how our challenges are similar, even though the color of our skin may be different, right? The unique situations may be a little bit different, but we're all kind of dealing with it. So by coming together as a table is what we call it, and kind of thinking things through, we're able to learn from each other. So this is one of the real benefits.
Well, look, there's incredible talent and innovation and energy happening all over the city. And one of the things that I like about Elevated, and there are other groups, is they're not just focused on a tiny geography. They're looking for opportunities to bring people together, to borrow from this group or that neighborhood. How does it work here? So they're incredibly good at collaboration. And really, as you said, setting a table that is wide enough for people who may not think that they have something in common to sit and listen and realize, you know what, we actually do.
Yes.
And that's what I think the power of our neighborhoods should be about. There are things that are happening all over the city where there are these points of connection, but we don't know it if we're not talking,
Right.
if we're not sitting down at the same table. And again, I think that's a place where we as the mayor, me as the mayor, but also the mayor's office team can really, because we are seeing more of the 360 connections, we can be a convener to break down those silos and say, hey, Ghian, do you know so-and-so?
Yeah.
Hey, so-and-so, have you met this person? Oh, no, I didn't know that. We bring it together, and then that table's set, and then watch the magic happen.
That's right.
That's what we should be about.
That's wonderful. What should Chicagoans know about how EOT is supporting the city's COVID recovery plan? You came out with an incredible, one of the first in the nation, I believe.
Yep.
How's ETOD impacting that?
Well, it's core to what our recovery is. What we've consistently said, because it's what I really believe, we can't recover and only have a certain part of our city, a certain sector be the ones that are recovering. We've got to have a holistic approach to this, and equity and inclusion. I'm going to say it again, equity and inclusion have to be the strategy. Not part of the strategy, the strategy. Why is that important? What do we know about what has happened over this last 15 months? Long-standing challenges in healthcare, in access to healthcare, in jobs, the economy, all of those fault lines that we knew existed before, they were elevated in an incredible way that we can't ignore.
Right.
Now, we haven't solved every problem in the last 15 months, nor will we solve them in the next 15 months. But what we haven't done is looked away and said, that's a problem for another day.
Yeah.
What we know is people of color, low income, working class people have been hit the hardest because they were suffering before COVID. COVID exacerbated those challenges. So if we're thinking about a robust recovery, we've got to think about it in ways of bringing everybody into it. So if you own a little coffee shop down in back of the yards, and I'm thinking of a place in particular, we want to make sure that the recovery includes you. If you own a business on 75th Street and you've been hard hit, we want to make sure it includes you. Same thing on the north side. Talk to a family in Lakeview, family-owned business, coffee shop. They've really been struggling. We want to make sure that the recovery includes them. So the word of the day is, I'm channeling my old Sesame Street watching, right? The word of the day is intentionality around equity and inclusion. We've got to be intentional. We've got to be focused on equity and inclusion, looking across our geography at those people who've been most hard hit, who've been left behind, and making sure that there is a pathway for them to also recover.
One of the ways that we kind of talk about it when we have our conversations is you talk about one Chicago, right? Talk about us being one Chicago, not it's the south side or it's the north side, but as you think about some of these challenges, you think about how it impacts the entire city.
Yeah, we've got to get back to recognizing that we're neighbors.
Yeah.
It's you can't think there but for the grace of God to go I. You have to think my neighbor is hurting.
Right.
My neighbor is in need. And we saw that really manifest throughout the pandemic, and I'm going to focus in particular around food. People volunteering for pantries, donating, being there, giving money, bringing foodstuffs. They didn't know who that food was going to.
That's right.
They just knew that some resident of Chicago was in need, and so they stepped up to help. We have to have that same sensibility around one Chicago. Our neighbors need us now more than ever, and we've all got to be in it to step up and help someone that we may never know. They may never know us, but our neighbor is in need, and we got to step up.
I love that. Early, when you first won the election, you know, I ride the bus or I ride my bike, you know that around. But what's been your experience with public transportation? What's your favorite mode of transportation? Is it bike? Is it bus? Is it train? How do you move around? Obviously now you ride in a black car right now, but before that.
I like the train.
The train.
Yeah, I really like the train.
Okay.
You know, you get there, you see the hustle, and you feel the vibrancy of the city when people are going down into the trains, standing on the platform, people going north, people going south, and you just see this kind of, it's an equalizer because the people that ride the trains are diverse.
Yeah.
They're coming and going, they come from different backgrounds, different experiences, but when you're on the train, everybody comes together.
That's
so
right.
I liked the train when I used to ride it because, you know, again, I'm old. I put my Walkman on. Now I put my headphones on, try to get my music going. But I got myself in a certain mindset before I took on whatever the work challenges were of the day. But I like riding the train.
I got to tell you, I rode the train from O'Hare the other day, and the traffic is back, right? So it was a quick and efficient way for me to get downtown.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor. On behalf of Elevated and Spark, we really appreciate the time. Glad that people get a chance to kind of see you, you know, not necessarily in front of the podium, kind of just the regular conversations that we have. And we want to be partners with you.
Thank you.
In terms of making sure that this infrastructure that we have, this very important infrastructure, that we utilize it to better all of Chicago.
Yeah, and you know, first of all, thank you for inviting me into the conversation. I love the opportunity to kind of think about policy and think about how the government can really be a catalyst for helping the work that's already being done out there in neighborhoods. So really appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yo, what's up? It's your favorite neighborhood historian, Dilla, and recently I've been very fortunate to be able to collaborate with people and organizations that care an awful lot about Chicago. One of those awesome organizations is the non-for-profit Elevated Chicago. Their mission is to make sure that public transportation is equitable for everyone in Chicago. As the city started to implement the Chicago Plan of 1909, we very much had cars in mind. And so nowadays, places like the East Side neighborhood of Chicago have a very hard time catching public transportation. The same could be said about Chicago's South Side neighborhood, Altgeld Gardens. Chicago does have an amazing public transportation system that is underused, but if you don't live near the city center, it is hard to access. Hit up Elevated Chicago's Twitter or Instagram page. You can also go to their website to register for the Symposium they're having Friday, where we discuss this and more.
You know, I think all of the crises that are happening and really has come to a head over in 2020, and especially in our city, I think they're all interconnected when it comes to climate change, population shift, health inequities, racial justice, criminal justice system, racial injustice, the criminal justice system. I think they're all interconnected. But when I think about what, you know, is the most important, it's, you know, racial injustice, because it really starts to spill out into all the other areas. And until you really tackle the systemic racism that has been occurring for decades, it's, you know, it is challenging to start to just address the other issues. And I think if we really get at the root of the systemic injustice or systemic racism, we can really start to tackle all the other areas, all the other crises that really challenge both Chicago but other cities across the United States.
I couldn't agree with you more. If you think about last year in the COVID pandemic, which by the way is still not over, but it planted its roots and seeds in the existing crevices and social chasms that pre-existed. So the pre-existing condition of structural racism, of wealth inequality, of poor housing, of crowded housing, of unsafe workspaces, all conspired to create disparate mortality. And of all of them, I would agree with you, I think it's the intersection of racial injustice, structural racism, and its long-term impact. I wrote this book called The Death Gap, How Inequality Kills, because I saw through my patients that there was something about the neighborhood they were living in that dictate how long they could live or die. And that was like both shocking to me but unknown to other people. And life expectancy in neighborhoods has become much more of a focus as there's more and more data that shows that neighborhoods very, very close together. There's a 16-year life expectancy gap between the Loop and Garfield Park, for example.
We think about how can ETOD really support closing the life expectancy gap. It's about bringing in investments. It's about bringing in development that really gets at some of the root causes.
Yeah, as a doctor and even as a healthcare organization, if something goes wrong, you have to do a root cause analysis. What's the root cause of why someone got sick or why someone got harmed? And when you apply that same process of a root cause analysis on, say, Garfield Park, you have to come to the conclusion that what's wrong was structural racism and economic deprivation. And the root cause of the economic deprivation was capital extraction. Capital has been removed from that community. And there's a lot of capital in that community, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But what would happen if we put capital back? And all the forms of capital, human capital, there's a lot of great human capital, social capital, the way we're all interconnected together, but financial capital. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this project, a catalytic investment. Imagine being able to connect the empty lots with people from the neighborhood who want to buy houses, and as another part of our programming, supporting that intention and initiative. Because now you've got all of the cogwheels going. We used to talk today, how do you get the flywheels going such that this engine sort of moves on its own? And I think you've mentioned a lot of them, and it starts with just listen to what the community wants and do what they want.
Right.
It's not that complicated.
Right.
We want a wellness center. We want a place where our kids and where we can go that's inside and safe. We want a health center there. We want to address the empty lots. We want a grocery store. Yeah. It's not that complicated, and your whole plan can be organized around what the community says they want.
The Wellness Center will certainly be a catalyst along with developing a corridor plan that builds on like I said, the existing assets, but also takes into consideration the transit that exists in the community and linking and connecting the transit with the existing assets, with the existing programs in the community, figuring out what the missing holes are and how do we tackle those holes.
So I think a well thought out, equitable transit-oriented development should have walkability. The streetscape should be inviting, and people should feel safe. I think part of the isolation is while the park was there, people didn't feel safe walking there. While Madison Pulaski corridor was there, people didn't feel safe necessarily getting out and walking around. And hopefully that will change with the kind of development we're talking about.
Yeah, we learned during the pandemic that people were spending most of their day-to-day in such a short radius compared to pre-pandemic, where they were willing to go into many other neighborhoods. But when you look at neighborhoods that don't have the access to all the things that you just spoke about, it does create that isolation, because you aren't able to just walk outside your front door and go to the store, go to the grocer, go to grab food, or feel comfortable walking around the park. So as we look to the future, and if a challenge like this comes up again, we hopefully will have prepared ourselves in a way that we've really invested in neighborhoods, so that every neighborhood has same and similar amenities. Some of the other things that we've even heard the community speak about is what are we doing? And when I say we, I'm talking about the community as a whole. What about the empty vacant lots, the empty vacant homes? Really, residents are saying, I live next door to a home that's boarded up. How do we start to address that? How do we provide that housing for a low cost to someone who wants to move in, wants to reside there? You start to turn vacant lots into thriving lots. You start to turn abandoned buildings into occupied homes. It really helps to build the economics in those neighborhoods as well. Right. And we're hearing residents at our town hall meetings also saying, I'd rather this home beside me, somebody live in it, even if they did pay lower cost for that home. Yeah. We want to see more people. We want to see more people in housing. And then the other piece is we've heard so many stories about Madison and Pulaski, and I've heard a lot of stories about how it used to be the location where everybody bought their prom outfit. And this just sort of nostalgia that I hear people speak about of just reminiscing on the past of Madison and Pulaski, and the enthusiasm to get that corridor back, those two corridors back to the thriving core that it used to be, and thriving corridors that it used to be. It's really there are two important commercial corridors in the neighborhood.
The idea that you've got these the L tracks, really, that people can come in and come out of that community. And the bus routes along Madison and Pulaski, I mean, these are like, it's almost like ideally located. And it's a pre-existing shopping district. So I think, equitable-oriented development and transport-related development allows you to build on sort of the fact that they are these assets, but they've been disconnected.
Right. I think, that as well as really building strong ETOD will help spur other investment in the sort of second tier of a neighborhood.
Right.
And it'll really bring stronger economics to those neighborhoods. And when somebody has been owning a home for 20 years and there's not been strong investment in the neighborhood, and then all of a sudden there is transit-oriented development investment, their home value starts to change. They really create equity in their homes. You think about neighborhoods that, the disparity between neighborhoods, black and white, and the increase in home value, and the ability to take out to refinance and then build something else, or not even just that, pay for your kid to go to college.
Right.
How ETOD can really create value in neighborhoods that can allow families to make long-term investments for their households and for their families.
So the issue of displacement is a giant issue, and in communities even like Garfield Park, where the rents are still fairly reasonable, people are spending more than half their income on housing. So the affordability of housing is a critically central thing, because even prior to the pandemic, neighborhoods like Garfield Park, like Englewood, like others in the city, had been losing population as people were just seeking more affordable and more livable options. So how do we do this in a way that keeps displacement from happening?
Yeah, and that's something that we battle with all the time, is ensuring that when we are working in neighborhoods that we're providing opportunities and opportunities for the neighborhood to be revitalized in a way that's actually for the residents that live there. And one of many ways is to provide housing that's affordable. Provide housing that's affordable to the individuals that currently live there, as well as provide sort of a mixed income approach that you want to ensure that there's housing opportunities for various incomes.
There's a cost for structural racism and segregation that Chicago has paid the price for. I remember the report that came out from the Metropolitan Planning Council that said if we were just averagely segregated, it would be $4 billion more to the local economy each year. And so we've got to think about the way to repopulate these neighborhoods, because they can grow a lot bigger than they are, and they've really shrunk, and that was that was before the pandemic, is to make this the center of jobs in the Midwest, not just entry-level jobs, but jobs that have hope at the end of it. The chance of being able to create family wealth. That's always been, people migrate, people move for a couple of reasons. One is opportunity, and the other is safety. And if we can create neighborhoods that are walkable, that people feel safe in, that have amenities in them, and there are jobs, that's going to solve some of the historical displacement issues. But it's going to require capital investments, because billions and billions of dollars are extracted from these neighborhoods. And so we have to think that the solution is going to involve sort of a scale of capital investment in our neighborhoods that we haven't seen in decades. And that's what I'm hopeful for in our one little neighborhood on a couple of corners, that we can really make a difference in partnership with the community. And then we'll begin to see that influx of people back in.
Yeah, you certainly nailed it with all that you just said. Is jobs, is job opportunities, housing, affordable housing, safe neighborhoods. We're looking at, with the Invest Southwest initiative and the ETOD plan, you think about those that are really focused on how do you bring up the economics in a neighborhood, but for the people who live there, and how do you infuse both public and private dollars into important commercial corridors in different neighborhoods.
I wanted to say is, here we had the worst pandemic in a century, disproportionate death rates among Black and brown people. Everything shut down. And the most optimistic table that I sat around was this Garfield Park collaborative, all of us together. And I think people can look at the world through a lens of pessimism or hopelessness, or one can look through it through optimism and hope. And I got to tell you, working with you, Kemena, has been one of the most joyful things I've done. You're a can-do person. You're always plugging ahead. And that whole table with the community members around it and community builders, Rush, Westside United, was among the most optimistic table. Imagine millions of those tables around this country. It's all, the power has always existed, not downtown, not in some tall high-rise, around tables like that. And if we can do that in the midst of the worst pandemic, plan for a renaissance of Garfield Park, imagine what we can do all around the city. And that's why I'm hopeful and why I'm optimistic. But why are you hopeful and optimistic?
You hit on the reasons why I am. And it takes me to the Walter Payton quote, we can do more together than we can alone. And I'm optimistic that the way that we've come together, not just through the collaborative, but in other communities, other neighborhoods, to come together in a collective way with nonprofits, community organizations, businesses, government, it coming together with diverse voices at the table, diverse people at the table, to really think about how we create change, how we move into the future. I'm hopeful that will not stop in 2021, that it will continue to carry along into the future.
Equitable transit-oriented development is something that's absolutely essential for our city. In neighborhoods where we'd otherwise see vacant lots or businesses that are getting shut down, we are committed to projects that are going to help people, that are going to provide equitable housing opportunity, cafes, bookstores, libraries, grocery stores, creating true walkable communities. Going beyond the city's goals for simply having transit-oriented development, we're looking at something that is truly equitable, so that any part of the neighborhood, any part of the city, you can walk out and you can see a truly walkable community, thriving with opportunity and commerce, something that's absolutely beautiful, and that's what we are trying to do here.
We can focus on housing that is built for families and working class people. We can give more people access to public transit. We can create open spaces like La Placita that welcomes everybody.
Hi, my name is Isabel Cabrera. I am a parent mentor with the Logan Square Neighborhood Association. Going to Emmett Street. Every time I see Emmett, fill my heart with joy, because I know that 100 families are going to have an opportunity. I used to see an empty parking lot all the time, and now I see opportunities, I see hope, I see future in my neighborhood. This is Emmett. This is Emmett. This is the power of the people. This is motivation. This is real motivation. And this is in memory memory of all the families that had to leave our neighborhood. They forcibly had to leave. And just to think that we are going to welcome 100 families very soon, that's a real good feeling of joy, of happiness. We got the butterfly representing our families, that they move out of our neighborhood, but that we still having them here, remember about them. I like this. Quiero un mundo donde quepan muchos mundos. And that's what Logan Square is offering to every single person that moves to this neighborhood, that we have different ideas, but we all making it work. We all make all those ideas work and make this world a lot more better. You don't observe same things when you are in a car, so it's better to see them through a walk. So I'm gonna show you through this walk. I'm gonna do this walk real quick to keep showing you different parts of Logan Square. I'm gonna go here because they normally cars don't stop over there. Not even when there's a sign over here, so it's to be very careful. I think this is healing for our community. All this art, my husband, he grew up in this area, and I'm happy and glad that my kids can grow up here in Logan Square. This is just healing. See this world. What it makes Logan Square so great, the diverse ideas. That's what makes this neighborhood so great and so powerful.
Hi, I'm Melvin Thompson, Executive Director of the Andaleo Institute and a member of the city's ETOD working group. Here around the recently renovated CTA Red Lines terminal at the 95th Street station, ETOD is a goal not yet realized. Tens of thousands of commuters travel 95th Street daily, yet there are no coffee shops, no lunch spots, no fresh markets. I'm working hard to change that. With the opening of Andaleo Cafe Du Bois later this year, I'm working to get ETOD on track. The cafe will be a locally owned and managed coffee shop, the only one of its kind, and it will be located at West 95th Street at Harvard, just blocks away from this beautiful Red Line station. More investment is needed in this area. With imagination and intention, we can get ETOD on track here and throughout this community.
I think Chicago definitely has that kind of that je ne sais quoi, right? When it comes to transit, because like I said, I've taken transit my entire life in Los Angeles. I took the bus every day. I took the bus every day to work. I hardly ever drove. In LA. I know. I hardly ever drove. And people would look at me just like you looked at me. And I'm like, oh, you're gonna take the train or you're gonna take the bus to LAX, really? I'm like, yes. But again, the difference is that I think Chicagoans love and respect their transit system and want it to flourish. And it's just not the same other places.
And you know, the surveys, which I think are fairly reliable, they come back consistently. Chicagoans consistently report their general satisfaction with the transit system. You know, people can geek out on transit. You don't even have to work in transportation to be talking about the transportation system. You can go into any apartment in the city of Chicago and someone has a print of the L system, a photograph of the trains. There's something about Chicago's transit system that they decorate their apartment.
Absolutely.
So I think Chicago is a transit-oriented city because the city was built around transit, people use transit, and people talk about transit in this city.
Absolutely.
I'm super excited that the city of Chicago is doing the first comprehensive plan that we've had since 1966, and I applaud the Lightfoot administration for pushing that through. There were people that tried to get the Emanuel administration to do it, didn't work. There were folks that tried to get the Daley administration to do it, it didn't work. Somehow she was able to recognize that as diverse as this city is, and we want our neighborhoods to be diverse, we want our neighborhoods to be unique, she somehow recognized that we're not all swimming in the same direction.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that we need to unify under a shared vision.
So we're thinking about things like requirements for density around within a certain radius around transit stops. We're thinking about different zoning requirements, whether that be for making more paseos or more connections to transit so that people, like for me, I live at the Pulaski stop on the Orange Line, and every day I risk my life crossing the street to get to and from my stop, even though I only live 3 blocks away. And so having provisions and having guidance for our sister agencies and for development that may happen in neighborhoods so that people don't just have access to it, because it's one thing to just have access to it, but can you access it safely? Can you use it to its best and high use? Is it a gathering place for people? Like thinking past just putting a transit stop in the middle of a neighborhood and saying, oh, we've done our job. And so I think that's what I'm most excited about for the comprehensive plan, because we'll be able to actually, again, to your point, swim in one direction.
So, Nina, you make a really good point. We can't stop at the comprehensive plan because that's just, it's going to be a bunch of great policy. It's going to be the right policy. It's going to say all the right things. It's going to talk about a modern Chicago, an equitable Chicago, a forward-thinking Chicago. That language needs to be in the plan. But the plan becomes real, the plan becomes actionable, the plan sort of takes legal teeth through zoning.
Yep.
That's how you take that policy and actually make it applicable on the ground. Is through how you zone the land. That's when the policies in the plan become real.
Policy is you should do, and and zoning is you shall do. Like you must.
Exactly.
And that is our way of making sure that we are holding ourselves accountable as the city, but then also holding developers accountable and holding our community members accountable for making sure that we're not just talking and filling the room with hot air with empty promises, that we're actually accomplishing what we set out to do.
So you mentioned something about zoning, which is so true. That zoning, in a very literal way, determines the form and function of the buildings and the spaces at ground level.
Oh yeah.
So they do create an environment of safety or an environment of hostility, just by virtue of how the buildings are positioned, how high they go, the bulk of the buildings.
Zoning is the backbone of how we create the built environment. So it is our main tool to making sure that the built environment is created so that the most vulnerable populations can thrive. So if people are like, oh, I understand, again, zoning may not be people's forte, but for a lot of our cities throughout the United States and even abroad, this is how we actually get things done on the ground and make sure that they're done correctly.
And what's exciting about zoning around transit is you can be creative.
Yeah.
I mean, when you take a station area and you apply zoning, you can do greater densities. You can do ground floor retail. You can mix uses in a way that you can't mix uses in a different kind of zoning district that just has all single-family homes, for example. So zoning allows everything about a community to come together in one place. And I feel like here in Chicago, we're not taking advantage of the fact that we've got this built-in legacy transit system that we really should be doing more with and aren't, particularly in communities of color.
Absolutely. And so when we think about accessibility, when we think about people who may not have the same ability to climb upstairs or use wheelchairs, or even moms who have kids in car seats. I always, whenever I see a mother and their child on the public transit, I'm like, you go girl, because it can be really difficult. But again, if we build our transit system for the most vulnerable populations, then it will work for everybody. And so, if I would say that that's probably accessibility and just making sure that people feel safe. And when I say safety, I don't necessarily mean like, oh, I'm gonna fall down or I'm gonna get hit by a train. But as a Black woman, I can say, for people of color in public spaces, it can be intimidating. Or, when we think about a George Floyd, or we think about, as we see police officers in the street, and I'm like, oh, I don't necessarily want to walk down that street, or I don't want to go into that neighborhood because I don't feel safe. So no matter where you are on public transit, whether I'm traveling from the southeast side to the northwest side, I should feel safe as the person that I am. And I think as we continue to spread that message, both with its users and its operators, and those who secure public transit, more people will be inclined to use it and feel like they can truly be free to explore the city no matter what neighborhood they want to go into.
Absolutely. When Commissioner Cox came to the city and he started talking about, I don't know if he was calling it the 15-minute neighborhood, I got super excited about that because I know that that's something that Paris had been doing, and I think that is something that the city of Chicago absolutely should do. We're a city of 2.7 million. We were built for about 5 million. We're losing population. Walkability is one way to attract people back to our city.
Absolutely.
It's how we interact with one another. We are wired to interact. We are wired biologically to engage with one another. And a city can make that impossible to do, or a city can make that really easy to do.
Walkability is definitely a privilege that I think everybody should have the opportunity to experience. And it's not until we get to that point where everybody can walk within 15 minutes of their house to get soy milk if they need it, or regular milk if they need it, or if they need to go to the doctor, they can walk down the street and see a physician. Those are the types of things that I think will be the tell-all of if we're actually accomplishing what we're setting out to do.
And I totally agree with what you said. I'm gonna add something extra. I think it's sad that walkability is a privilege.
Right.
That's the state of America today. That walkability is considered a privilege. I think of walkability as not. I don't even want to say a human right. It's a necessity. I should be able to walk in my neighborhood without safety concerns, or walk in my neighborhood and be able to get the soy milk or the gallon of regular milk. I shouldn't have to beg to be able to do that.
Planning has caused a lot of harm in the world, but I also believe that there's people like me who want to help undo that harm every day. Although the institution is going to consistently cause harm because that's the way it was created. This country was created that way, and we can all acknowledge that, right? Just the historic nature of redlining and transportation discrimination and just all sorts of things in the built environment. What we don't necessarily acknowledge day to day is the bad actors, right? So that's why isplanningRacist.com was created. So people can go on the website. There's different categories of stories that you can share. So was it in the workplace? Was it just out in the community? Was it in your professional organization? And you can share your story anonymously, and it only asks for your zip code. So it populates and you can see an entire map from all over the country of people's stories. And we wanted, again, an avenue for people to kind of share that. And what I'm hoping this website does, and also just the movement of calling out harm and calling out bad actors, is that one, it makes people realize, look in the mirror and say, there's no racist fairy in planning that makes these things happen. I make them happen. And I have that conversation with myself daily, especially as somebody who really cares, works in government, wants to undo harm. I have a conversation with myself every day of like, what harm am I going to undo today? And so we're hoping that people will also hold themselves accountable. And when it comes to transportation planning and undoing harm, undoing its racist past, I think what we hope as a group of urban planners who really care about calling out racism is that we make the masses more aware that racism is built in and baked into the built environment, but it doesn't have to be that way. And with policies like the ETOD plan, or with different ordinances, we can slowly undo that harm, which is really important.
You know, I think about the transportation system and how for decades it was used for racist practices, whether it's highways plowing through black communities or immigrant
communities.
Name
any city.
You just
there's a highway that plows through the black community.
There's so many examples of how transportation systems were used to separate. And I'm going to add, improving the transit system. I'm thinking about the red line on the Dan Ryan going south, and the blue line on the Kennedy going out to O'Hare, and the green and blue lines on the Eisenhower. Those are very exposed stations because they're right there in the middle of those, you know, expressways. The city did a great job with the 95th Street transit station. It's beautiful. We need to think about how we're going to create less hostile, and I mean hostile in terms of traffic, pollution,
because then it makes you not want to take it.
It makes you not want to. And then how do you do transit-oriented development adjacent to the Dan Ryan Expressway?
Yeah, right.
So we need to figure out a way, and we need to bring some brilliant transportation engineers into the conversation to make those stations more accessible and less hostile in terms of traffic, noise, and pollution.
Absolutely.
I feel like now, particularly the Elevated Chicago work, we are using the transportation system to connect.
Yeah.
It's turning that historic practice on its side, and it's saying the transportation system can be used for economic mobility.
Yeah.
It can connect communities, it can connect people to opportunity. Station areas are places around which you can do all kinds of activities. There can be all kinds of uses, and affordability should be baked into all of that.
Absolutely. There's definitely forward movement. I'm excited to see where we'll go.
And you know, the bottom line is this: our cities belong to us.
Yes.
They don't just belong to us white people. They belong to us. The citizens of our cities include the citizens of Chicago, a third white, third Latinx, and a third black. And planning is our tool to decide how we want our city to look and function
and grow.
And it's a public process, and the public owns the planning process, and the public needs to get involved. And I feel like when people understand how creative urban planning is, it really is creative.
Yeah.
It's creating the fabric of an urban place. They're going to want to get involved because they realize there's so many creative opportunities in urban planning.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, but I would turn it on its head. It's not that people haven't been wanting to be involved. By design, planning is not inclusive.
Right.
So when we talk about neighborhoods on the south or west sides that have about 10, 20 plans on a shelf that they've done for themselves, City Hall has never implemented them. That was on purpose. And so I think we're in an atmosphere of opportunity with this administration, with this planning commissioner to, again, not just have lip service and be intentionally inclusive. Not say you have to come to us, but we're going to go to you. We're going to meet you where you are. You're the expert. We're not the experts. And so, yeah, so that's how I would just like flip that on its head, because people have wanted to be involved. And actually, if you ask any random, person, resident walking down the street in any of our neighborhoods, they know exactly what they want for themselves. They know exactly what they want for their families. They know exactly what they want for their grandkids and their great-grandkids,
and they probably participated in a neighborhood planning
process. They probably have.
And wondered what happened with the ideas that they put on the table.
Exactly. And it's not just Chicago. I mean, like I said, I've worked in Los Angeles. I'm from Detroit. And so I can firmly say that communities of color everywhere experience the same thing, and it's by design. But we're going to undo that harm.
This year, we are excited to expand our family of e-hubs from the original 7 to what we call Elevated Chicago Plus. This includes e-hubs from the Loop to Rogers Park, to Washington Heights, to Upper Gresham, and more. We will be supporting these e-hubs with capital, with programs, with advocacy, with technical assistance, with communication support, and more.
We need quality apartments that are affordable near transit in neighborhoods across Chicago. We need this ETOD to build stronger and more equitable communities and local economies. ETOD benefits the workers in the small businesses and restaurants that are essential to strong neighborhoods. ETOD gives Chicagoans a chance to save on transportation and commuting costs. ETOD helps to create safer, more pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods. And ETOD helps to address climate change. So the need to deliver ETOD across Chicago is a really important issue to stay focused on. The Community Builders is working on a number of ETOD projects, including ones in the South Loop, in Lincoln Square, and now in downtown Chicago next to the Harold Washington Library.
In Chicago, the architectural innovation really comes from the response to challenges of the time. And today's challenges are really about housing inequity and climate change.
Assemble Chicago is a new civic hub in the Loop that brings Chicagoans together, serves neighborhoods throughout the city, provides apartments for the Loop's essential workforce, all in an inspiring carbon-neutral building. Hi, I'm Will Woodley. I'm the Regional Vice President of Development for the Community Builders. The Community Builders is one of the nation's leading mission-driven developers. Our mission is to build and sustain strong communities where all people can thrive. In Chicago, we've not only built over 2,000 homes for a mix of incomes, we've also delivered spaces that help to strengthen communities while also bringing them together.
Hi everyone, I'm Jeannie Gang. I'm the founding principal and partner at Studio Gang. We're an architecture and urban design practice headquartered right here in Chicago. We've been working on large-scale projects in downtown Chicago like the Aqua Tower and St. Regis, but this project provides an opportunity to really bring our design skills toward a project that addresses this geographic inequities in the city and really can start to make change for all of our residents.
With Studio Gang, you not only get exceptional design talent, but you get a real commitment to social justice and equity, and also a focus on bringing people together with each other and with nature.
We have assembled a team that truly reflects the diversity and talent of our city. At every stage and in every discipline, we have brought together minority and women-owned business leaders for the development of Assemble Chicago, including a mentor-protege program that will truly support small businesses and help them grow.
We called the project Assemble Chicago, and we did that because it will give people in Chicago a chance to share in the prosperity of downtown and be part of downtown.
This project is a real opportunity to support our downtown's post-COVID revitalization, but particularly to do so in a way that promotes a more equitable and more sustainable Chicago.
The project consists of three main elements. The first is a mixed-income residential community that provides comfortable, healthy living spaces and introduces new levels of affordability to the Loop. The second is really the Neighbor Hub, which is a vibrant, community-centered base of the building that welcomes and supports groups from every neighborhood. And finally, there's the rejuvenated Pritzker Park, which works together with the Neighbor Hub to create active indoor-outdoor destinations for all Chicagoans in the heart of downtown.
The Neighbor Hub is Assemble Chicago's base. It's all about creating an inclusive space for all Chicagoans to gather in downtown. It has everything from a food hall where local minority restaurants can grow to a Rush Wellness Clinic that will support our residents. It also includes an event, co-working, and collaboration space that will support nonprofit and community-based organizations.
The Center for Neighborhood Technology and Elevated Chicago will help lead a consortium of community-based organizations throughout the city that will help inform our design and operations of the Neighbor Hub space.
We are working with communities all over the city and the county, and so one of the things that I see that CNT can use this space for and create programs for is, one, to bring that diversity of interest together, which is something that I think is phenomenal, or to have either of those groups meet together in one space to develop strategies, to develop programs, to even have events where you invite in elected officials or people who can, for example, solve the problems. So having a space that is affordable, that is open to the communities, open to community groups is awesome. And I can't wait to have it built. And I hope Assemble Chicago is the next big development in downtown Chicago.
This would be possibly the only equitable transit-oriented development building in Chicago that not only provides housing for people, but also provides a health clinic inside of the development, and also has all this amazing community space co-designed with communities to offer not only to the residents of the neighborhood, but also to residents of neighborhoods across Chicago.
All of these spaces are designed to be flexible and to bring people together, but also to be able to utilize the outdoors and connect directly into the park.
Having this building turn the park into its front yard is really important. The park certainly is almost like a dead zone right now, and being able to activate that will transform this part of State Street into something much more dynamic. This is a great opportunity for the city of Chicago and also for downtown.
Assemble Chicago will provide over 200 apartments for the workforce, making minimum wage up to $75,000 per year.
This is an essential workforce for our Chicago Loop. They help to operate our museums, our stores, our restaurants, our office buildings. And even though thousands of condos and apartments have been built since 2000, nearly none of those homes are affordable to this essential Loop workforce.
The Loop is home to some of my favorite buildings in Chicago, like the Fisher Building and the Monadnock Building. They are recognizable for their beautiful synthesis of structure and facades that are the result of a quest for natural daylight resulting in the Chicago window. These buildings were workplaces, and the Chicago window was extremely innovative at the time because it really maximized the amount of natural light and air reaching the interior. Our design updates this facade language with 21st century technologies and materials to achieve a significantly more energy efficient building. With the apartments, we stack the living room and the bedroom in plan so both can reach out and touch the facade. This allows both spaces to get tons of fresh air and light and to have protection from the sound of nearby L train.
To achieve net zero, Assemble Chicago's carbon offsets are actually solar panel investments in other Chicago neighborhoods.
I've been doing high performance buildings for a while now, and 20 of those years I've actually collaborated with Jeannie on these high performance projects. And one of the themes which we've always focused on is how do we think about sustainability early on in a project. So the whole idea is to approach this in a very integrated fashion and incorporate them early when key decisions on the design of a building are made. We finally made a decision to use the special mix of concrete which actually captures carbon. And there's a very specific reason we did that, because we wanted to find that optimum balance between reducing carbon and the affordability of construction, because we want this project to be replicable not just here in the US, but around the world.
We're ready to build this thing. Things are totally ingrained in the design, like the biodiverse gardens, the photovoltaics on the roof, the natural ventilation, and all these things come together to provide resilient and sustainable housing.
Assemble Chicago's goals are ambitious, but the Community Builders has over 55 years experience delivering these types of developments. And we've assembled the right team to deliver this development for all of Chicago.
It's not only an example for Chicago, but it can really be something that can be used worldwide as how to make cities more inclusive.
We are seeing at the federal level a lot more funding being proposed specifically for transit than we've ever seen in the history of the federal transit program. So that's encouraging to me. I'm hopeful that, along with that, there are proposals by the administration and others to create new grant programs that really can address racial inequities, including improving service and hopefully operating assistance for transit so that it can better serve low-income communities. We still have most of our low-income communities in this country have transit service. At best, it's hourly service, which is really not going to get anyone reliably to a job that they need to be at. And so much more investment is needed in transit. And I'm curious, Laura, CTA, like LA Metro, has really been struggling with its budget and its revenues, especially in the light of COVID. And I know even during this moment, that's very hard for the transit agency. And I'm curious if there's been some strategy or messaging that you've been finding has helped to resonate to make those budget cases, even for a transit agency that's feeling the pinch in its budget right now? I think that would be really useful if there are any insights you've gleaned to help us in Chicago and beyond.
We're investing $160 billion into a ton of new rail lines. I would be remiss to not mention that we're not doing a similar investment in the bus system, which we need to be doing. And so as you know, all this fancy new rail is rolling out, we're losing transit ridership. We have very significant drops in transit ridership. And so the case that we're making at ACT LA is like, we can have a city that is transit oriented. We can have a city that is truly supporting transit ridership and supporting families, but we have to do the development different. I mean, we really we have a massive housing crisis here. It's impacting every facet of the city, including the transit system, and we need every agency, and like we need all hands on deck here. One of the really exciting parts of our work right now is we have a Metro as a Sanctuary campaign that we started with our members a few years ago, which our goal is to cut the police contracts that Metro has. So Metro spends about $800 million, 800 million, almost $1 billion, over 5 years on contracts with the Los Angeles Police Department, the Long Beach Police Department, and the LA Sheriff's Department. And these contracts keep growing over time. And what we've seen is continued concern about safety on the system. They're ineffective. And we've seen a lot of riders, particularly people of color on the system, youth of color, be very uncomfortable with the presence of police officers on the system. And so while, you know, Metro's big line is this is our strategy for creating safety, what we've seen is this actually makes a lot of riders feel unsafe. And it's not an effective safety strategy. And our goal is to get these contracts reinvested, so divest from the contracts and invest that money, that $800 million, into real safety programs. And so we put out a report called Metro as a Sanctuary. It's up on ACT LA's website. And we basically listed out what we think would be a start for real safety strategies. And those include things like new programs, so a new transit ambassador program to actually staff the stations and have wayfinding and help with navigating the system. Things like elevator attendants. We want a complete overhaul of how Metro approaches homelessness on the system. So we're calling for real services, resources, outreach workers that are trained. When we look at what's going on here with our housing crisis and the data that we've seen about what's being built versus not, I mean, we just had our housing element. We're in the middle of our housing element right now, and looking at what was built during the last cycle, it's like we're way above moderate goals. We've not reached any of the targets on affordable housing. This is the city with the worst overcrowding, the worst homelessness crisis, the worst rent burden in the country.
One of the things that I think has gained the most traction the most recently is ETOD has almost become synonymous with affordable housing, in part because of the affordable housing crises happening in almost every part of the country. And so looking at how transit agencies can be a partner in addressing that and making commitments to meeting affordable housing goals in their joint development policies. So I look back on a lot of the work we were doing, which was really to make the case that there was a market for housing near transit. And, we were calling out the need, the crisis that we saw kind of emerging around a lot of low-income housing tax credit projects across the country near transit that were at risk of expiring and being lost, and really encouraging communities to do something to preserve those. But I think overall, a lot of our early TOD work, which still dominates a lot of the TOD narrative, is around this market for housing. And it's really focused on new development and new people coming in, and a white gaze of, if we can get the more affluent white people to move in, that's somehow going to save our cities and our communities, versus saying people are living in these communities now, and there are things that are not working in their communities. There's, lack of job access and job opportunities. There's safety issues. There's a whole host of things that we need to be improving and investing in our communities. And I feel encouraged by ETOD efforts that are really pushing against that narrative and saying, we need to look at a full range of housing choice options.
We need to move beyond the inclusionary conversation. We need to be talking about a lot bigger investment in 100% affordable, and particularly and permanently affordable. And these conversations about community control. So yeah, we're trying to just push the city to think a lot more aggressively about affordability and deep affordability. Really looking at this holistically, ETOD, or equitable transit-oriented development, it requires a just transit system, and it requires housing justice, and really focusing development from here on out on equity, so that we're accounting for the inequitable development of our region up until this point. And so for us, it's to be transit oriented, it requires it to be equitable, because that is actually what building for transit riders means.
Well, I'm excited to watch as things unfold, because I so appreciate the work you and all your partners do to kind of not accept the status quo, keep pushing, and absolutely these issues and ideas emerging around social housing and really much bigger investments that are needed. We just, as a country, have to have a better solution than a tax credit that only provides affordable housing to a small segment of the population for a time-limited period. It's just not a long-term sustainable strategy to meet the growing and very real crises that our communities face in LA and Chicago and beyond. So I think lots of things in the works. We will see what ultimately comes out of it, but it's encouraging to me that, things that even 2 years ago, no one was really seriously questioning tearing down freeways or transit operating assistance. And now there are legitimate conversations happening at the federal level about both of those and many other issues centered around environmental justice and other needs for our communities.
Yours truly. I'll be your tour guide today. Here we are at the Open Center for the Arts location. More than like just a gallery, there's all sorts of things that are happening here, right? If you can't read that, it says the Voice of This World project is an exhibition which bridges people across the world to share their thoughts through artistic expression. And it goes on. So what's really neat about this is they'll get a lot of local artists, but they'll also get a lot of young artists from high schools and other places around Chicago to contribute to this. It's interesting to think about as we think about investment in commerce and why art is really important to this community and the culture of the people that inhabit this community as a primarily Latinx community within Chicago, and what we're trying to do here in sort of understanding not just the needs of the community socially, but also the needs of the people as they would desire to see investments happening in their community.
The greatest climate threat facing Chicago and the region, I believe, is water. I think we have too much of it and also too little of it. So as our temperatures are rising, warmer air can hold more moisture, which is leading to heavy rainfalls and increased flooding, particularly on the south and west sides of the city that do not have adequate stormwater infrastructure to hold this enormous amount of water. And so I believe that ETOD can be a solution by creating more permeable surfaces, such as rain gardens or green infrastructure through parks or other greenways in our neighborhoods to be able to absorb the amount of water. We also have too little water in our lake, which is our source of drinking water, which is rapidly evaporating, and to the point where the lake will no longer be able to flow in to the river, Chicago River. And our Chicago River is where our wastewater is, which means it will flow into our lake, which is where we don't want our wastewater to be going. So that is our greatest threat.
Awesome. I couldn't agree with Chandra's answer more. And I would add, like, just if we're talking about the actual impacts, I think the second greatest impact is going to be heat waves. They're happening more and more rapidly. They're more and more intense, and there are folks that just can't get access to the things they need during those times, which basically means they can't get to cool places that are cooler. So I think the way ETOD can deal with that is by including more shade structures, by doing a lot of the same nature-based solutions that Chandra just described, but it would include things like canopy trees so that there are more and more places for people to take shelter and refuge from all of those, from the sun that's becoming more and more deadly. I think it's just really important to say, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything Chandra wouldn't have said, but these are impacts that are already happening to people. They're not somewhere in this distant amorphous future. Every year, people spend thousands of dollars dealing with refinishing basements that they had built over time after building wealth over generations to house their mothers and fathers as they grow older and care for them. They're happening to people who are dealing with water coming in over their back steps into their downstairs basements in apartment buildings and single family homes. Doesn't matter how dense the housing is, it's still going to affect you. And the same thing can be true for heat island impacts. So if we don't have energy efficiency, people are spending all their money on cooling their houses in the summer. That causes brownouts. That causes blackouts eventually, and all of the network that we have for energy across the region. So these are things that are happening now, and they're happening mostly to Black and brown folks, honestly. And these are things that we can solve with ETOD. Now we should have pithy conversation.
Yeah, and I would just add, personally, in addition to flooding happening in people's basements, they're also happening to roofs. So I live in the neighborhood of Bronzeville, and this past spring, when there was intense rainfalls, my roof collapsed. And so I live in a courtyard building. It was a three flat, family-owned, Black woman-owned building, and she had to use part of her savings and reserves to be able to do a full roof replacement. And so you think about this compounded and all the other smaller units in this neighborhood having to constantly make these types of repairs based on responding to this intense rainfall. I think we need to increase access to these nature-based solutions that Drew spoke about. I think there needs to be resources allocated for these types of interventions. I think we need leadership at the local level, state level, national level to respond to this. We have initiatives like Justice 40, for example, that are spotlighting and prioritizing minority and disadvantaged communities. That needs to become the norm on how we allocate resources, to say that those closest to the pain and impacts of these problems should be closest to the power and solutions. And so I think we need courage. I think that would ultimately address these issues most immediately.
I would just back up what Chandra said and put it in a couple of categories. One is that we need to move from this idea of we need to move beyond the idea that all we need to do is sort of stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. That's super important. It is still the thing we need to do most. But if we do that to the exclusion of figuring out ways to protect people now, we're just going to end up with the same. We're going to end up with Black and brown folks suffering more, just like every other economic restructuring that's ever happened. So there's sort of two things. We need to look at capital planning, and we need to look at capital planning, and we need to move toward focusing that on environmental justice and doing it much more broadly inclusive of community. So it can't just happen from the federal government down with everybody reacting to things that happen at the federal level. We have to incorporate nature-based solutions into capital planning, and that capital planning needs to be done and driven by communities as opposed to sort of centralized governments.
I guess I'm just thinking about like the acute stressors of like water shutoffs and like poor air quality, particularly on the southwest sides because of industrial pollution. These are all choices that people made. The city decided to cut off water to places when we know our drinking water is at risk of being polluted. And we have communities in a pandemic that couldn't breathe because of the amount of air pollution caused. So these are all opportunities where different decisions could have been made, and we have the will and the power to advocate to change those decisions. So just want to lift up the ways that organizations and people are fighting every day and getting organized. And we all need to work in solidarity with those grassroots organizations.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we need to lift up places like Southeast Environmental Task Force and Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, who are really at the forefront of this. And a lot of us are learning from them and trying to be allies and in support of the struggles that they're in right now. And there's been a lot of good work on those efforts over the past year. And it just all needs to continue and expand.
Yes. So get involved, like donate, show up, volunteer, tell a friend. Like, we have work to do.
Yeah.
So everyone should be on the front lines of this fight.
Totally. And do all the cheesy things too, like recycle and compost and all that stuff. But we need to move beyond just sort of like feel good individual efforts and come together and compel some change on larger institutional actors too.
So before the pandemic, I would have said that the city has a pretty healthy transportation network. Certainly needed some maintenance investment and things like that, the CTA and things like that. And on the accessibility side, there's a lot of CTA rail stations that still don't have elevators. But again, back before the pandemic, the CTA created a plan to address that over the next 20 years, right? With priorities and plans to outfit the remaining stations with access. So I think before the pandemic, I was feeling pretty good about where things are at. I was a little worried about where the money was going to come from to get some of those investments done, right? But again, now, the pandemic, we have money flowing. So that's not necessarily the problem. It's the question of where's the money going to go, right? Is it going to be distributed equitably? Is it going to be spent on projects that really impact people's lives every day all around the city, right?
In other parts of the city, particularly the south and west side, I don't really know how much has changed in terms of making it more accessible for people transit-wise, and also tying that with affordable housing. I can't think of a lot of examples that aren't on the north side, especially in this part of the city. And I spent a lot of time on the southwest side, and I mean, it's still as car dependent as ever. Maybe even more since the pandemic. I don't see anything changing. So yeah, I think there is some progress in parts of the city, and then other parts you wouldn't know the difference year to year because nothing has changed.
Right. Like you said, I mean, you go farther south or farther west, and you get into disinvested neighborhoods really quickly, right? Where the infrastructure was falling apart before all this, and people can't even get to a bus stop safely, so they're not even taking the buses that exist, you know, in those neighborhoods. And that's a problem. That either creates more car dependence, or more often than not, because those are also lower income neighborhoods, people just don't get out. You know, older adults, people with disabilities just end up shut in, socially isolated. Again, not necessarily because they can't go anywhere, but because they don't feel it's safe, or they're not able to navigate broken sidewalks, you know, broken intersections to get anywhere. So, you know, there's this huge problem of disinvestment that cascades on itself and creates that situation for people, again, especially on the south and west side. So, you know, I whether it's through the ETOD program that the city's launching, the Elevated has helped with, or whether it's, you know, the mayor's Invest Southwest program, again, there's a lot of talk and at least some resources going towards addressing some of these problems, but like the devil's always in the details, right? There's this gap, I think, between the ideal and what actually is, that it's going to take good policy, it's going to take good investment, but it's going to take helping people understand that there is benefits that hopefully outweigh the risks in most places. And if there are places where that's not true, then we need to address that risk-reward ratio and fix it, right? Make the investments in other things we need to, whether it's, again, infrastructure or meaningful public safety that doesn't over-police, right? I mean, there's so many riddles to solve, but we have to, like, keep working on all of them.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to, yeah, like touch on all those nuances that go beyond just the physical train station or the physical bus stop, but all the surrounding aspects of a community and how people interact with like mobility and moving around. When we think of transit, sometimes we tend to focus on trains, and granted, I mean, yeah, like if you're working downtown and near a train station, it's great. But buses serve people throughout the city that don't have access to train stations. So I think we need to continue to prioritize speeding up the city's buses. So when I think about where the city needs to go after the pandemic and as we progress in this next phase of the pandemic, I would love to see more investment in the city's buses. I think we saw that there were people that didn't abandon transit, they couldn't abandon transit, Black and brown essential workers, and I would love to continue to see us make progress in speeding up the city's buses because they do go in areas that trains don't go. There are a lot of people now, a lot of neighborhoods that aren't served by train stations. My family in Hermosa, which isn't too far from the Blue Line, but you still have to take a bus to the Blue Line. They're not served by a train station. Beaumont Cregan, a lot of the areas where my family frequents and lives, they're not served by an immediate train station. So buses are like the lifeline of my family, and I think the lifelines of a lot of communities that don't have train stations. I also think of how many people also took up biking during the pandemic, and I think there was also a lot of talk of, more people on bikes, kind of like biking boom. And I do think a lot about that, how that's also going to play a role in like kind of traffic patterns. I think I'm starting to see less people on bikes now. Maybe we're past that pandemic peak and the city hasn't invested a lot in like bike infrastructure. And I feel like I've been seeing people say that traffic seems to have come back with like a vengeance. And yeah, if you're on a bike, you're not going to feel particularly safe. And at the height of the pandemic, there was a lot less cars on the road. So I do think about how the city is thinking about continuing to make people feel safe, taking bike rides. If we're really thinking about this kind of post-pandemic age and taking what happened during the pandemic and continue to like build off of some of those patterns people took up.
I do hope that when we're making decisions about transportation future, transit-oriented development future after the pandemic, that we are thinking, that we are thinking with more than just our heads, right? That we're remembering how it felt to be isolated at the worst points of the pandemic. That what we saw, again, older loved ones go through especially, right? I mean, I know that a lot of older folks especially felt completely isolated because they were most at risk. And even, in the really, really dark days is like, can I even risk someone coming to my home to bring me a meal, or is that too dangerous, right? So we saw isolation go up for sure because of that.
I think that's why transportation policy has to go hand in hand with housing policy. And I think it's helpful that we're in Logan Square. There's a lot of interesting examples here where, a lot of transportation policy has connected to that housing piece that's really important. And I think for the first time in a long time, I feel like the perception of TOD is changing. I think partly because of the work also of people in this neighborhood really fighting to change what is happening around TOD, actually make it equitable TOD. I think of a lot of those roots of how TOD was taking shape in this neighborhood, and I do see some potential for that to change, and that's exciting to think about because, like you were saying, especially in this neighborhood, TOD has not meant accessibility. It's meant luxury housing. It hasn't been for the people, like long-term residents in this community. And I hope tide is changing to create actual housing that's transit-oriented for people that, like a low-income working class, long-time residents of Logan Square and other parts of the city.
And I hope that now we more intentionally think about things like multi-generational housing, right? And we think about how do we keep families, whether they're biological families or chosen families, together in places so that there's support for for folks who are more vulnerable. Again, I don't really like that word, but I get why people think of it. So again, older adults, disabled people, people who need some degree of socialization just to get life done, right? We need to have housing and housing and like community amenities that make that possible. So yeah, I hope that we consider that, and we consider how all of that development, again, hopefully intentional development to address that, interfaces with the transportation network, and how we do that equitably.
Yeah, I went a long time without actually like riding transit, and I've started to use it a lot more again, and I definitely dawned on me, I'm like, oh, I miss riding transit, and yeah, it helps connect me to things and people that I hadn't been connected to in a long time because of the pandemic. And yeah, it definitely has made me reflect that, yeah, it's important to people. It's important to our connectivity as people.
The point is I think that people are going to have a lot of reasons they aren't doing things that they don't understand completely. So until we really address some of that, or give people space to address that for themselves, it's going to be hard to, again, predict at least, right, what the transit usage patterns are going to be, whether people keep moving to the suburbs or if they come back to the city. I mean, there's all these different patterns that have been set during the pandemic that, you know, how far they reverse, or if they reverse, or if a new pattern develops, that is all very unclear to me because of that factors.
Yeah, I think an equity-based focus on transportation has to acknowledge that trauma, and I don't know how to do that, but I think that's a question we need to at least ask ourselves.
Here along the Green Line tracks, ETOD is soul stirring, soul food and art, mosaics and murals, music, black box theaters, pop-ups. It's Overton at 51st Street, it's Hustleman at 55th, it's Daily at 63rd. When art and culture thrive in the corridors that carry us to and from transit, our communities become more walkable, more welcoming. Now I want to introduce you to David Anthony Geary, artist, unicorn, Washington Park resident, Green Line South Community Table member, and my very, very, very best friend as he takes us through what walkability looks like here in Washington Park.
This is David Anthony Geary. And we're going to start my walkability tour. Here we have the boulevard. So Garfield Boulevard stretches between the Red Line and Green Line stations. I tend to use the Green Line station, which we're going to walk to in just a second. The Clio Community Center commissioned me to create a new mural commemorating the memory of Cleo Barrett and the mission of the Clio Center. And so it says, keep loving each other, which is the motto and also an acronym for Clio. This is actually my largest project to date. And the cool thing is when I walk out of my door, I get to see this. I think this is an incredibly beautiful and vibrant community that at one point in history was thoroughly thriving and has the potential to again. Something awesome this way comes. There's some construction happening. Love the concept of creating a creative corridor, and as a visual artist, being in the heart of that. This is the historic Green Line station. I believe it's one of the oldest Green Line stations that will eventually be an incubator space. It's currently closed down because of COVID. So as we cross King Drive, we walk into Washington Park, which is also the namesake of the neighborhood. but this is the actual park. This park was established in 1869. So here is a really beautiful mural. It says, "It's now, respect life." This mural was funded in part by the Chicago Park District's Night Out. It's a prison and neighborhood arts project at Statesville Prison, input from Washington Park Advisory Council. So it's a beautiful mural that was a combination of inmates and community artists. Particularly during COVID, you know, I haven't been doing my commute and working in my studio, so finding places to, you know, not be sedentary is really important. And a walk in the park is a really safe way to get outside. You know, I feel like this intersection does not have a long enough cross time to get all the way across the boulevard. Like, they can work on that. But it's clearly designed for the cars and not so much for the people. We are on the north side of Garfield Boulevard and walking up onto Green Line Station. This is our neighborhood entrepreneur. You can on any day catch the hustle man. Lots of goods for folks, actually reasonable prices and decent goods. I have definitely been in a rush and grabbed a snack on the way for a train. One of my favorite projects that I've done is the mural at the entrance to this building. And I'd love to do more murals in the community and just kind of build and beautify this community so that it feels as vibrant as it has the potential to. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and shut things off before I go inside and warm up.
Art can be a vehicle for so many things. One of those things is self-esteem and confidence and knowing your worth and validating your worth, because if you have that foundation, then that can translate into so many other things. Exposing children to art and building up families through artistic practices doesn't necessarily mean that they should be artists. Maybe they've gained something from that experience they can then take with them through their next career path or wherever they end up in life, right? Yeah. Because this whole city is ours, and we need to start acting like it's ours. I love that. So I'll come visit you in your neighborhood, you come out to me, you know?
This whole city is ours.
Yeah.
Whether you know it or not, it's ours.
Yes.
I love what you were saying about like that they're already artists, but they may not use that word. They don't have that identity, right? Like, right. And so like some of my favorite artists, like I'm wearing a design by Marcelo Ferrer, who's like our immigrant rights organizer, right? Like he doesn't think of himself as like,
that's what I'm saying.
I'm this artist.
It's like,
right?
You're dope. Like claim it,
right?
Claim
like,
it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Can I wear that? Like, can I get that tattooed?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Norma Rios, who like is a mom, right? And she's now is creating so much beautiful art in our community as a way, right, for her to contribute to speak to the erasure that she was feeling, right? Like not feeling at home anymore. Yeah. So now she's creating art, right? Some of my favorite people, right, are not people who have the time, right? They have full-time jobs. They may be in a factory all day, but they're creating art, right? Yes. They're making earrings, right? They have indigenous, right? Like all that kind of stuff, right?
See? Yeah.
And giving space. The pop-up shops give up space. One of our like front desk kind of receptionist, now she's going to be our community resource center manager, but she has a mercado, so like a group of women, and they set up shop like 2 blocks down on Sundays, and it's all women who
immigrant women who make, you know, either piñatas at home or tamales at home, earrings, you know, or they get shipments so it's custom couture. Right. But they're not using those words, but it is, right? Like so part of that is like us digesting and having ingrained or absorbed this notion of like this high, whatever this like upper echelon level of whatever like validating art is. It's not just museums. It's not just, you know, the art scene, the art world. We are all creators. EAC, you know, we started really, initially we started just to like as an activist originated group that just really just wanted to represent. We really we didn't form under the idea of let's be a nonprofit or nothing like that. It was like, yo, we were just tired of the narrative that was about where we grew up, where we currently, some of us still live, all of us who came from, my family still live there, and we're all artists, and we were all friends, or at least one point of connection. It was like, yo, we should just form together like Voltron and say, hey, we're here, and you know, we became more activated last year, more than before. For us at LSNA, what we're really trying to do is the visibility of our people, right? There really is a need to say like, yo, we're still here. So this whole idea of whose community is this, right?
Yeah.
And who feels welcomed, who is seen, right? Is such a theme throughout all of our organizing that we do. It resonates a lot with our immigrant, mostly our base of our leaders are immigrant mothers, right? For a lot of different reasons, don't feel seen, don't feel heard. And then you're in a super gentrified community where nobody thinks of your community necessarily anymore, right, as an immigrant community. But here you are, right? Like you're trying to. It's been yours for. It's been, right? And you came here because you felt welcome, right? You felt like this could be yours. And so some of the work that we're doing around these themes of like, we're here to stay, both in terms of housing, right, being able to live here, and in terms of immigrant rights, right? That we're here to stay, and we're going to be unapologetic about who we are and what our history and our connections, and that we're going to stay here. We fought for a lot of the improvements, right? I talked about our Dominican mamas who fought for the 606, right? And we call it the Bloomingdale Trail, right? Because it's on Bloomingdale Street that cuts across the community. And so we have plans for La Placita, right, with support from Elevated, right? So to create a actual Mexican plaza, right? Like you see it all through Latin America, right? It's a very similar thing. You know, murals along Armitage Corridor, putting up butterflies, mosaic authentic representation, and visual cues to one another, right? That nod, that wink, wink. This is us. This is us. We're being us. It's safe to be us here, right? And who's comfortable here is important, right? In a gentrifying space, you often end up feeling very uncomfortable because it all of a sudden doesn't feel like you anymore, right? And so what we've been working with our mamas and with our young people, right, is the medicine of our symbols, our cultural symbols, and being very public about them. I like the medicine. See, and that also speaks to the history of the world, the country, the city. You know, how we have also visual markers that tell you boundaries based on historically how things have been, right? And we have to break those cycles. I think about Tonika and her next upcoming Inequity for Sale project, where she's putting land markers in front of homes that were basically like legally stolen from Black families because of land sale contracts. And so it's about not erasing history. It's about actually bringing forth a history that people may not even be aware
that we're
of.
still living in it,
We're
right?
still living in it. People still live in that house that they didn't own, that they've been paying off forever, right? In a dilapidated area that's not being invested.
And it became dilapidated. Why? Not by chance.
Exactly.
Right? This is systemic.
The story of Chicago, right, is a very intentional racialized segregation, right? Like our city, the planners, right, the real estate developers, the bankers, literally laid out the map, right? Created terms, created conditions, policies that drove where investment happened and where investment wouldn't happen, right? And so what I respect and appreciate about ETOD, right, is the intentionality. That it's saying, this is the history in which we're operating, right? Because I think if we talk about development without social justice and without a historical context, we're just going to create the same pain and cycles over and over again. So what we need with that intent, with ETOD, is that intentionality of telling this history and then saying all people, right, especially the ones who have been the most excluded, right, from what every healthy community has, right? We need to do things with intentions. We need policies that allow community residents to stay and thrive in their community. I think that when we talk about equitable transit-oriented development, we think about the fact that folks still ride the bus, very much so, still take the trains. There's so much vacant land around these areas. Let's activate that. Let's activate the sidewalk. Let's create something that leaves a lasting impression, but also can maybe exist as a hub for continual engagement, continual creative engagement. I mean, something that's also very, very important to me is like, whether my mom knew she was doing it or not, like, we're world citizens, you know? Like, we hopped on the bus and went outside of our community quite a bit, because I don't know how she knew it, but she knew when some museum was having a free day or this neighborhood was having this festival. So, you know, this city always felt like my city. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized fully how that's not exactly a reality for many, and how much of a feat and how much work it took to make that a reality too, when we live in such a segregated city. And so, you know, I think we all should be comfortable floating through spaces, from whether it be Soho House or, you know, I don't even know, like over here by Dill Pickle to somewhere in South Shore. Like, we should be able to bounce around wherever we need to, or wherever our heart calls us to be. Like, no boundaries. No boundaries while still preserving history. Like, is that possible? Because too often when we say no boundaries and something gets lost. You know what I'm saying? How do you still have like a strong sense of culture while still feeling free, grounded and light?
And you know, one marker of that would be that your zip code no longer dictates or predicts your life expectancy.
Look at you quoting the ELT poster. Yes, your zip code no longer determines.
That would be one measure of that. Like, oh, wherever you live, you get to live this full, abundant life.
As anyone else.
As anyone else, you know?
I love that.
Last fall, Elevated Chicago and the ETOD working group rallied to put together the first ETOD policy plan. We asked many of you watching now to read and weigh in on the recommendations, and you did. There were thousands of visits to the ETOD website. There were hundreds of downloads of the ETOD policy plan in both English and in Espanol. There were dozens of recommendations posted, and we just want to say thank you.
And now you guys are in for a treat. Let's take it to my brother Roberto Riquejo and Sherman Dilla Thomas. You guys know him. You've seen him on TikTok videos. You learn things about your neighborhood that you didn't even know. He drops gems on us on a regular. Follow him on Twitter. Get your Chicago history game in order. Handing it over to you guys now.
There's so much I love about Chicago's history. It's so multi-layered. I think my favorite thing about Chicago's history is that we're responsible for everything dope about America. Like, everything cool about America was either made in Chicago or made better in Chicago. And I think that's why I'm disseminating history on TikTok and on Twitter. I want people to have a better image of Chicago versus the stuff that's out in the national media, you know?
I think what people are not seeing in the south and the west sides of Chicago is Chicago, frankly. And speaking now, again, as an immigrant myself, very quickly, as soon as I set foot in Chicago, I was told, don't go to the west side, don't go to the south side. And our friend Tanika Johnson, photographer, tells the story better than anyone else, and we've talked about this. And I was surprised because when people told me this, both as a planner, because I was a city planner, and also as a as an immigrant, I was asking back and saying, why are you telling me not to go to 2/3 of the city, right? And nobody really want to unpack some of that, right? So I had to unpack it on my own and talking to people from those communities that would tell me, oh no, what you're hearing is fear from folks who often don't even go there, have never gone there, and there's a mythology that has developed. It's almost multi-generational mythology that is keeping Chicagoans from enjoying their own city, which is heartbreaking to me, that you would call yourself a Chicagoan with such pride. For me, just working through Elevated, I've gotten to learn a lot about the North Lawndale, Garfield Park, Woodlawn, Washington Park. Logan Square was my first community when I moved here, so I already knew a little bit about it. And the amazing architecture, food, people, art, activism, stories, the layers there.
Oh my goodness, if this was church, I would be standing up clapping, I would have been waving, all kind of flags, you were preaching to the choir for sure. That bothers me so much, and what's sad, again, something to be fixed, you have to recognize that our institutions used to do that. I believe now if you're going to see the Chicago Tourism Board website, you're not going to see go to Brown Sugar Bakery on 75th Street. You're not going to see go to Soul Vegan. Like that whole 75th Street corridor is full of black-owned businesses that could use the tourism. What people won't tell you is that by virtue of Chicago's policies, the people on the south and west side are our first preservationists, right? Because of redlining, you couldn't get a new structure built. But now the Queen Anne architecture that you see, everybody's like, spend $1 million on it, right? The west side line is moving west every decade, You see hipsters on Western, right? In my day, you wouldn't have saw that, right? The line was way, way, way further to Damon. But they're coveting those spaces because they were preserved, right? And that's a South Side story that I'm so into telling.
For me, one of the most beautiful things that we do in Elevated is to bring neighbors to build community together and also to build actual bricks and mortar together. For us, creating community near transit starts by getting the community together first, right?
We all have pride in our train stations, You identify in Chicago with what Catholic parish you're from, what high school you went to, or what train station you're nearby. Those are your 3 identifying markers as a Chicagoan. It's almost like your Chicago quiz. You fail those 3, I know you're from Naperville, Look, how you get downtown, right? You guys to come quick. 67, red line, blue line, green line, pink. You guys to say something to me, right? I'm able to move around Chicago before the days of a GPS, right? A lot of that was due to the fact that I was familiar with bus lines. So once I did get my bearing, I knew which buses would get me back home, which buses would get me downtown, which buses would get me to the place that I was going to. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. When I was bored, I would take the number 44, which is the racing bus. They've cut so much of it now, but it used to run from 87th Street all the way to Merchandise Mart. And so that is a lot of demographic shifts. In the 90s, some of the factories were still around. I watched the stockyard, go abandoned, and then now it's reintegrated with different type of companies. I seen the International Amphitheater. I was seeing Biggie Smalls there. I seen it get tore down. All from that Racine line. But then it would turn on Wallace. I seen what used to really stick out to me is how identical the neighborhoods look, right? Because of the 1909 Chicago plan, how it was laid out, how the lots was laid out, and how much better some of the neighborhoods would look than mine, even though it was the same thing, right? It was just 20 bungalows on each side of the street, but theirs just looked so much better. Their street just looked so much better. I noticed a lot of that.
So let me tell you how cool it is to hear somebody who knows the bus lines and who navigates through buses, because it's not very common, right?
I think it's hard in Chicago because Chicago was laid out because of the car, right? We learned the importance of alleys after New York, so we made sure that we included alleys in all of our plans. But then right as the neighborhood started to grow, right as we were at our most prosperous, that's when Henry Ford had streamlined the making of the car. And so Chicago was designed for the car. That's why every bungalow and two-flat had a garage. You don't see that in any other city as they built out, right? If you think about that, the neighborhoods have driveways or garages. Every single Chicago neighborhood that has a bungalow on a two-flat, it came with it because it was designed for the car. It was designed for one car. And so I think maybe returning to that, and they had that in mind for the Chicago plan too. Like, it was designed for one car. You know, that's why there isn't a lot of parking on your street, because it was designed for one car, one home type of thing. Now you got 3 cars out there. So it's ridiculous. But they also were very meticulous in laying out the bus lines and the train lines and the train stops. That's how the neighborhoods developed. The initial onset of the neighborhoods were the train stops and the train depots. Most neighborhoods identified by what the train stop was called. The train stop named the neighborhood in a lot of instances. So just a return to that is just really returning back to what worked. And I'd say it's very hard to eliminate cars here in Chicago. You were just mentioning the racist policies. A lot of our expressways were laid out in a way to promote racial division in the city. But in doing that, they eliminated the ability for someone who doesn't have the car to get to work in certain pockets of the city. And so while I would love to encourage the folks of, say, Roseland to be more green, walk, ride a bike, right? I sincerely mean that. I can't really let that come out of my mouth because I know that there isn't a train. You know, you got somehow, if you're on 115th Street, get to 95th Street to even get on the train. To combat that, you put some opportunity in those areas, some jobs or job readiness in those areas, and then I think you'll have more people able to use public transportation because they'll have maybe more ridership, or have them extend the times. When the neighborhoods were of a different demographic, you can get on the bus any time of night, right? And that's not the case either. So they used to have lines that extended to the suburbs. They cut in those. And if you don't have a college degree in Chicago, you're going to probably have to work in the suburbs. Right?
I understand some communities don't have the transit assets, so the families need a car, right? So we are not about saying anti-car everywhere, but some neighborhoods for sure are underutilizing their transit assets, and there's a lot to unpack there. Part of what Elevated is doing is to bring development and transit together, because our policies, as you were mentioning, are not welcoming to build around transit. They're more car-oriented than transit-oriented. You'll see probably more gas stations next to train stations than affordable housing next to train stations, which doesn't make sense at all, right? But that's in the codes, and it's in the rules. It's in the zoning of Chicago, and part of the work that we've been doing in partnership with the mayor's office is to start changing those rules and make it harder for car users to place themselves in the precious land around transit and find other places for those. And land near transit should be sacred for equitable uses, for affordable housing, for small businesses, for community centers, for green spaces. But it's hard because, as you pointed out, from the very beginning, planners and politicians, developers built for cars, right? And so here we are.
That's you make a good point. Thankfully, I got to go to the Hall of Fame enshrinement for Kobe Bryant. It was in Connecticut at Mohegan Sun Arena. And so it was all like Route 2, Route 3, whatever. So I asked someone from Connecticut, like, hey man, where's the interstate? And he's like, when they were building it, we didn't let them tear up our houses. And so to get to the interstate, you gotta like drive 20 minutes whatever way. And so I was like, oh man, that's inconvenient if I'm trying to go somewhere quick. And then you love this, I'm telling you. He said, that's what buses are for. Right?
Exactly. Going back to that sense of we are all one city and one neighborhood or one community, that I think things like the car separate us, right? The car is a personal, individual space, right? And there are people who can go from their home, and I have friends who go from their home to their work and to their, restaurant and back home, and they never get to interact with anybody or even see, other people but themselves, right? When you take the train or the bus, you are seeing a lot of things and you're hearing a lot of things, and then you get to talk to others and you get to be integrated. But I think part of the reason we believe in public transportation is because it creates community too, right? And the stations themselves, we look at them not just as a stop, but also as almost like a civic center, right? It's like a station area here in Ghian Lake. You see there is the hatchery here. There's a lot of folks hanging out around the train station and in the hatchery itself. There is a market that happens here on Saturdays that the Garfield Park Community Council convenes. So this is just not a stop. This is a community space, right? Not all of the train stations in Chicago are like that, and so our role is to get to more, Ghian Lake type stations that feel like this.
So those are also connecting points in the city, and I think connections bring better perspective, and then perspective provides more of a feeling of ownership, whether you're next to it or not, right? If you got a better perspective of the people that are on 79th Street, then you start to ask, like, why isn't the 79th Street train station better, or why isn't there affordable housing closer to the train station, right? And you'll start to ask those questions no matter what side of town you're on by connecting yourself to people who get off on the 79th Street train stop, right? Like, the more you talk to them, you might be talking about the new train station that they fixed on Ghian Lake, right? You're talking to somebody like, oh man, those type of exchanges promote the type of change we need here in Chicago, and it gets the ball rolling, it gets conversations rolling. Because I do believe in public transportation. It's safe, right? I think the one or two incidents that happen on the bus get so embellished that it makes it almost seem like it's not a safe thing. A lot of people are looking out for each other on the bus. And then there's a lot of kinship. Like I said, I'm so into perspective, and a lot of perspective is gained and corrected in spaces like on a train or on a bus.
There's a lot of pride in being a Chicagoan. There's also a lot of shame in the awful things that happen in Chicago, and some people really know how to bring those two together, and others get stuck on one or the other. And so that energy, I think, is what informs a lot of the work that we do, because we want to find out where are those areas of pride, right? And how do you elevate the pride of our neighborhoods, but also let's talk about that shame. Let's talk where that comes from and unpack, some of the history that people don't want to talk about.
I think the shame is what prevents us from moving forward, because in order to move forward, you got to acknowledge that it happened, right? You got to heal your cut. You got to acknowledge that you're bleeding. And so when you don't do that, you tend to let things get affected, and then it looks ugly.
Yeah, I see people like you as part of the therapy team that we need for all of us to start analyzing all that collectively. And there's not a lot of people who know how to facilitate that type of conversation.
Well, thank you. That's a very awesome compliment. Because I'm really, really after your pride. I'm not after your shame at all, right? I don't. That's not why I'm talking. That even when the subjects are heavy, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm not trying to leave you with the shame. I'm really hoping that the information I'm providing will give us an opportunity to find a way to find the road to pride.
JEDI stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. It's a cohort that was designed for City of Chicago professionals whose work influenced the built environment. The goal of the JEDI cohort is to bring professionals together to help operationalize equity within their current roles, leading to better planning, more equitable processes, and stronger community engagement at the community level, in addition to building capacity for internal public agencies. The JEDI cohort launched in June with 20 participants from a range of city departments, including the Departments of Housing, Transportation, CTA, the Mayor's Office, and DCAS. JEDIs will spend the next 10 months learning equity principles and how to apply them to their everyday work, specifically around the city's priority initiatives like Invest Southwest, citywide planning, and ETOD implementation.
This year, we launched a new initiative called the Equitable Development Ambassadors Program.
We partnered with Logan Square Neighborhood Association, Duo Development, and Rudd Resources.
Our goal is to demystify how things are built in Chicago and how to see, create, and advocate for equitable development.
My biggest takeaway, I think I was able to connect with people with different types of backgrounds. Some who were urban planners, some who were artists, local business owners, and I came from a background of nothing. Like I had my only experience in this was that I lived in my community, and in that experience, I was able to put it to good use. I live in the community of West Englewood, and I've seen that this investment in the community and EDA helped me understand that we have power to put our ideas out there, and that it can come locally. The ideas can originate from our neighbors, and that we could get this done. So it made the idea more tangible. It made the plan more tangible, that we can, in fact, have impacting change for the better in our community. But the way that the instructors broke it down, we went on Google Maps and we looked up where our community is, and we saw some land that was available, and we wanted to see how we can use that land and pretty much make it a resource for the people who live around it. So it's pretty much help coming from within the community, for the community. So who's gonna know the community better than the ones who live in it?
Here at 839 West 79th Street, my organization is developing a healthy hub for the Auburn Gresham and surrounding communities. It's a center that will offer full medical services, dental services, mental health services. There'll be a sit-down restaurant. There's going to be a high-tech teaching kitchen and training center, a financial institution. There's going to be a pharmacy and plenty of office space here in this building. Plus, our Healthy Hub collaborates with another wonderful nearby partner just 2.5 blocks away. It's a brand new urban farm and green energy center developed by Green Era Development. Transit is essential to our mission. It will allow people to access our resources, and the more people we welcome into our Auburn Gresham Healthy Lifestyle Hub, the stronger and more resilient our community can be. Here in Auburn Gresham, ETOD is in action.
Earlier, we said that this intersection was pulsating with energy. Some days it seems like all of the communities around the Green Line South stations are jumping with great things. Businesses are being restored, food options are expanding, mutual aid and solidarity on full display. Let's take a look at what jumping into ETOD looks like, thanks to the 40+ Double Dutch Jumping Club.
Hi, I'm Pam, and we are the 40+ Double Dutch Club. Here on the playground, where a map shows us how water flows through Brownsville.
Here in an open playground where a school has been closed is where ETOD is on track.
Here where people have gathered to paint, plan, and dream.
Here where we twist, turn, and tangle and show out. Here where we jump, ETOD is on track because joy is on track.
Because vitality is on track. Because community building is on track.
There's something really beautiful that I think it's overlooked in Chicago, the fact that the transit is elevated, right? You don't get that feeling when you come out of the ground from underground stations, but when you arrive into places and there are the stations in an elevated platform and you get this overlook of where you're arriving, that's an experience that's still very memorable for me every time I use the transit. And I think that connection between the experience, like coming to a place and discovering from this overlook, it's really exciting for me. And not enough, there's not enough yet that celebrates that moment. Yeah. So you're descending and you're like seeing things, but then, I don't know, for me, there's so much work to do that in that interstitial space, and that space in between your arrival or your getting to the station, that can be much more richer and active and vibrant, and you get all these opportunities to know about the place, the neighborhood that you're arriving.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like it needs more of that community spirit as part of that arrival experience. Because you're right, like you kind of get off, you look over this platform, you kind of see the neighborhood a little bit of where you are and what the things are, but how does it really, how does the transit and how does that neighborhood's really entity or identity really connect with a lot of, sort of how they're thinking about or how they want to represent their community to folks who are maybe just visiting or, who are, traveling there day to day for work, who just really want to, are moving back and forth, but, they should have an opportunity to really engage and be inspired when they come back home to their neighborhood.
I think what we should be looking to change and do differently from the architectural and design perspective is how do we develop processes, right, to design with and not for communities. One aspect that I think it's important to revisit and recalibrate and rethink all the time, and it's not a template to apply from one project to another. More so, how do we establish the framework in which a process can be recalibrated depending on what's the amenity, what is the space, who are the groups that need to be involved, and I think that's something that it's starting to change, but I think it needs like a stronger push and other models, right? Like documenting and revisiting models to see where things are improving in terms of process and what things need to be recalibrated.
Yeah, I think around process, there's definitely a key component that I always think about, which is just the opacity of the process right now. It's just very hard for even us as professionals always to like dive into, and then you kind of think about regular people who are just living their lives and trying to understand what's going on in their community, or who to talk to about a certain thing. It's very hard to actually understand whose responsibility is it, what are the steps that are needed to go through to ask these questions. A lot of it right now tends to go through like the alderman or that sort of thing, which is good, but there should be more of a clarity on like, oh, you know what, I need to talk to someone at DPD, or I need to talk to someone at the building department, or like how those pieces come together. I think needs a greater clarity overall for the city to really have a real impact on the neighborhoods that they're in. And we're in it together as a learning process. Like, I think the point about the expertise is something that is huge, just because when you get to school, there is so much of that like pantheon of figures that folks go through that that was how they made their name for themselves, and that was how they became sort of famous in certain ways as architects, where it was kind of the project or the thing, the outcome. And now it's like how do we really help designers understand that they're only part of the solution, that there's so much that we learn from community through those sessions that make the projects better and make them much more connected to place, much more rooted in place and in culture, that they have resonance with community, that there's a co-ownership, that it's not just my project, it's our project, and we're working together to actually achieve larger goals beyond simply maybe a building or a streetscape or a site or a project. It continues to move forward.
I completely agree. And also, I think understanding that the vision doesn't have to come from elsewhere. I think we're taught very clearly in architecture, like, the aesthetic and the vision is the architect's job. And I think that's completely the opposite of what we're trying to do, right? Yes. How do the vision doesn't need to come from, or inspiration doesn't need to come from outside, can come from within. If we do an intentional job, a good job, kind of, building all this amazing brainstorming of that feeds from the knowledge of communities, that's where the inspiration and the vision comes from. And how do we, and our job then is to synthesize, okay, this could look, with all this richness, this could look like this, or like this, or like that. And also I think, everyone is an expert, just going back to the expert concept. Everyone is an expert in their own experience. And I think just starting to dilute that differentiation of roles and bring in roles that feel more productive and more collaborative, and having us be more like connectors of ideas as opposed to generators of ideas. It's some of the kind of shifts that we need to start embracing. And they're hard to implement, right? It's very integrated in our DNA as trained architects. So a lot of work to do as educators, Dawveed.
Yes, absolutely. We've seen so much, about folks who are, doing these design projects and talk about bad community meetings. And they're like, and they kind of accept it as a thing. Like, oh yeah, we're just going to go here, and then they're going to yell at us for like 2 hours, and then that's going to be it. It's like, well, it doesn't have to be that way. There is a better process to collaborate and connect and, sort of have deeper conversations with community that end up with solutions that are much more robust and also kind of get past that, sort of adversarial relationship. It needs to be owned by community to continue it forward. Because if it doesn't, and we've seen this happen, where there's been projects that have just sort of been, the community needs this, and we're going to place it here, done, and then it doesn't actually have the impact that it's supposed to because there isn't that sense of ownership or collaboration. It's their thing versus our thing. So I think bringing the our into it is when we'll really see the change in the solution happening.
I think also, like, this idea of feeling authentic, it has to do with how much we cultivate this feeling of exchange, right? Everyone learns something. Everyone takes away something. Because I also think architecture and design practices have been extractive for a very long time. And, the more that everyone learns something new, and, we as designers, we're learning, what things are important and like how people experience spaces. Community learns about how spaces work, how they get built, how they get financed, how, all this implementation process it has multiple challenges and steps. So I think the spirit of exchange is very important for these processes to feel authentic and everyone connected and knowing that we're all working towards something together. I think as architects and designers, and educated in a very traditional way, I think that has been dominant for multiple decades, is the fact that we need to separate ourselves from the community. This role of the expert, the expertise that we bring to the table, is very intentionally separating us in the way that we supposed to conduct conversations, right? And unlearning that paradigm is a challenge, right? How do you unlearn everything you've been taught for so long and you've been seeing others to practice in that way? So I think one of the things that as designers it's very challenging is to strip ourselves from that paradigm. And how do we see ourselves as, facilitators, conveners, just more of and support, because we do have a very specific set of skill sets.
I think the most impactful moments that I've had in design have been when, sort of after some of these community sessions, folks have come up and been like, you're like, yes, you captured everything that we talked about in all of those meetings, that they don't feel like their time has been wasted, that their time has been valued, and it has translated into, sort of plans or designs or ideas that they can then say like, oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, we talked about that. There it is. I see it. Great. Yeah. Now how can we move it forward? And it becomes much less of an adversarial relationship.
So I think those experiences at the forefront of the design process can inform design, right?
Yes.
Where do we need more lighting? Where do we need more transparency? Where do we need protection from, like the elements? And I think just listening to that and trying to synthesize and trying to, visualize, like what are the things and experiences that in different public spaces, in different spaces around the stations, around, this very, like the half a mile from the transit, like what does that feel like from a kid's perspective, from the mom with a stroller, or like walking with two kids, from the elder that have a very different speed of walking, from teenagers that walk in groups, right, often. So how all those perspectives and the process are important to have at the very beginning of any design. And how, as designers, we need to be better understood as translators.
Yes.
Right? We need to translate that into, okay, what elements of design, physical elements of the infrastructure of the built environment can be used to amplify that.
For me, I mean, the future of transit is definitely more distributed. It's definitely more, sort of connected. As someone, I grew up here both on kind of the southeast side and South Shore, and then in Auburn Gresham on the southwest side, and taking the 87th Street bus and the 95th Street bus and the Ashland bus, and like all of those are vital connections as well. So I think finding ways to really make sure that those are part of the conversation as transit connectivity, sort of happens, but then also taking advantage of the transit that we already have. Like the Green Line is a tremendous asset that's severely sort of underdeveloped just because of the legacy and history of the city of Chicago and how it's been developed sort of over the decades. So how to really start to sort of understand those opportunities to really start to build around places that already have transit, and then starting to layer on some of those other layers. But I see it as a much more connected, vibrant, walkable place, and that's what we hear from community too. They want more walkability. They want restaurants and things in their neighborhoods to go to that sort of allow them to really experience the place that they live without having to go out to another neighborhood to have a good meal or to shop or to get groceries. So it's a much more, I think, distributed and connected, sort of place.
Yeah, I think what you're describing about the future of transit is very interconnected with what kind of urbanism, right, we are promoting and building and testing. And for me, that is, you have everything you need within a 10-minute walk. For me, that's the future, right? You don't even, if you want to ride your bike for exercising or leisure, that's an option. But you have everything you need for recreation, for health, for education, for food, for anything within your 10-minute walk or like in a walking distance. I see the future of transit being incredibly interconnected into the way that we develop more this accessibility of resources and assets and jobs to people, where people live. I think what the legacy of the 20th century was separating. I think the 21st century is about integrating. And it's a really, really hard job, but I think we're all agreeing that that's the way we want to live. And that's how we want to invest our resources in the future.
Don't listen to them. The voices that say you will be able to work at home the same way you work at your cubicle, in your office, safe in the walls of infrastructure built around you, brick and mortar that divides the privileged from the heroes who are just now being called essential.
Because this has changed us, will continue to change us, but we have trained for this. We who know the power of a we We who will not let the fists of policy beat the faces of the invisible. We know how to link arms across this city. We have implanted ourselves in this city, on the streets, in the high rises, on the 5th floor. We have been trained for this.
And this is not a drill. This is another battle in this long war to shake off the individual, to cement ourselves in community, to protect those who make our lives what they are, without a living wage, without sick days, without retirement, without acknowledgement.
We are sounding the alarm. Business as usual is done. Normal was never normal. We are activating in all the ways we know how, and in some ways we have never dreamed. And we will be weary, and we will ache.
For the people we cannot save, and for the time we cannot recoup. And we are allowed to bend a little because we don't break, to rest a little because we give more than what we take, to pause a little, hope a little, and be human a lot.
We will lend each other strength, lend each other peace. We will lend each other love so we can return to the trenches. We will find our way out of this, through this, together, leading with love, because we have trained for this.
I just read a poem with Dr. Arwadi.
I just read a poem with Leslé Honoré.
Thank you for joining us for the Elevated Chicago Symposium on ETOD.
On behalf of the Elevated Chicago Steering Committee, thanks for joining us today.
And a special thank you to our Leadership Council and our ETOD.
Thank you for joining us for our 4th ETOD Symposium, supported by the MacArthur Foundation, the Chicago Community Trust, and Spark.
And please keep in touch. This fall, we'll join the city of Chicago in announcing the ETOD pilot projects.